AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
Coming up on the Threat Status Podcast, we talk to Elad Schulman, the CEO and co-founder of the company Lasso Security, about cybersecurity in the age of AI and how AI-powered chatbots open up new security vulnerabilities. And then we break down the Pentagon's blockbuster recruiting numbers, the resurgence of Somali pirates, and we examine who's financially responsible if an adversary like China destroys commercial satellites relied on by the U.S. military. Don't forget to go to WashingtonTimes.com and sign up for the daily Threat Status newsletter. Hello and welcome to the Threat Status Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Wolfgang, national security correspondent at the Washington Times. I'm joined, as always, by my esteemed co-host, Guy Taylor, the national security editor here at the Times. Merry Christmas, happy holidays to everyone. Thanks for giving the show a listen here on what's a pretty busy news period, even in this holiday stretch going into the new year. But we've got a lot to get through today, including a really fascinating interview coming up later with Elad Schulman of the company Lasso Security, all about how AI and companies' use of AI is opening up new cyber security vulnerabilities that a lot of us probably aren't even really thinking about. So stay tuned for that. But before we get there, Guy, first things first, as always, what's on your radar in this Christmas week?
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here with you for this final episode of 2025. A pretty wild year it's been in global security. And now, as we're coming to the close of this first year of President Trump's second term in office, I've been reflecting that the underpinnings of a new Trump foreign policy doctrine are becoming clearer and clearer as the administration pushes what some are describing as a kind of 19th century style spheres of influence approach to how the U.S. positions itself in the world. It's an approach that I think is shown right now, perhaps most clearly, in the administration's focus on the Western Hemisphere and really on Venezuela. There are a lot of ways we can analyze the recent Trump administration 2025 national security strategy, Ben. That strategy, I think, cemented the reality of this spheres of influence approach as a kind of alternative to what can probably best be described as an international alliance strategy that undergirded U.S. power in the world throughout most of the post-World War II era. Something for listeners to think about heading into 2026 is that this Trump doctrine basically favors the protection and promotion of what the president and his tight-knit group of advisors deem to be U.S. core national interests as the primary driver of U.S. foreign policy and national security decisions, rather than a kind of broader pursuit of a global rules-based international order that's shaped or most influenced by the United States. Now, I'm not an opinion columnist. I'm not here to argue in favor or against. I'm just trying to show and articulate what I'm seeing as a more than 25-year veteran journalist covering this stuff. Here's something that feels like a fact, Ben. The new U.S. National Security Strategy document indicates that the U.S. now officially views Latin America as its backyard and is determined to push geopolitical rivals, great power rivals, namely China, but presumably also Russia as well as Iran, from the region, or cut out their influence in the region, which has close proximity to the U.S. homeland. I could go on and on here. I want to get to our feature interview, and I want to hear.
Well, yeah, Guy, just real quickly, I think one of the things that's kind of struck me is that while the administration very clearly wants to focus on its sphere of influence kind of in the Western hemisphere, it's still perfectly willing to pick and choose when to sort of bring the hammer down, so to speak, abroad, whether it's the strikes in Iran. We've seen a major uptick in the number of strikes against terrorist groups in Somalia. I'm going to talk about Syria later. We're seeing indications there could be sort of a renewed or ramped up U.S. engagement there in Syria. So the president clearly wants to focus on the Western Hemisphere and is obviously, as we've known for a decade now, very wary of forever wars, as he calls them. But he does seem, I think, even more willing than I kind of expected going into this second term of his to be willing to unleash the U.S. military abroad, whether it's the Mideast or Africa, when he feels he needs to.
Here's the deal, Ben. I think listeners can go and check this out because I got into this with our own reporter, Vaughn Cocaine, quite deeply. And Vaughn wrote a piece in recent days explaining how the spheres of influence doctrine became the dominant approach to foreign policy back in the 1800s as imperialism expanded around the world and rival nations, mostly of Europe, but also beyond, sought to carve out pieces of the territorial world for themselves and their own exploitation. Of course, the practice fell out of favor in the aftermath of World War II as rival powers began working together under U.S. leadership to promote really open markets worldwide. Where will this spheres of influence doctrine take us now? It remains to be seen. I think we'll be talking about it in 2026. Maybe it will be an anchor idea that we check in on from time to time. I digress for right now. One other thing, though, Ben, that's on my radar is a dispatch that threat status special correspondent in Ukraine, Guillaume Patak, wrote for us in recent days from Kyiv, highlighting how, as a fourth winter of all-out war unfolds in that country, Ukrainian forces are facing acute recruiting shortages, soaring desertion figures, and really a steady outflow of draft age citizens to Europe. And that's leaving the Ukrainian military struggling to hold the lengthy front line in eastern Ukraine against a Russian army that, despite major losses, really maintains a consistent manpower advantage. Moscow right now shows no sign of manpower fatigue. Guillaume's story highlights how, while Russia's total casualties in Ukraine, by some estimates, are close to 1 million, since 2022. The Kremlin continues to sign, again, by some estimates, as many as 50,000 to 60,000 new recruits every month with lucrative cash bonuses, subsidized housing, and maybe most notably, the mass incorporation of prison inmates into the Russian soldier ranks.
Yeah. New indications this week, I think, from British officials too, about sort of how ethnic minorities and other sort of disadvantaged groups across Russia are disproportionately, of course, affected by the war. And whether it's prison inmates or other folks, as you said, that kind of seem to be the first in line, with some of might even call sort of cannon fodder, sent to just in almost sentenced to death in the front lines of Ukraine. So that's true. Now, speaking of recruiting, let me talk for a minute about the Pentagon's recruiting numbers, which they say are the best in 15 years. Each military service beat its fiscal year 2025 recruiting target. This is, of course, a big turnaround from previous years. We've talked before in the show about how there was kind of a borderline recruiting crisis bubbling up in the military recently, and there was real concern about readiness, given that services were routinely falling short of their targets, both recruiting and retention numbers. That seems to have turned around. There's no doubt about the trend. Recruiting is way up. And the Trump administration believes it's because of its policies, and specifically a rejection of what critics call, of course, the woke policies of the Biden administration. A lot of things Defense Secretary Hegseth has done, his anti-DEI warrior ethos that we've talked a lot about on this show, does seem to be resonating with younger Americans, even if, of course, there's still some frustration with Hegseth among some senior officers. But overall, politics aside, I think this is good for the military. The Space Force hit its recruiting goal in 2025. It signed up 819 new recruits, which beat the target of 796. This is important because, as we talked about last week with Chief Master Sergeant of the Space Force, John Benevenia, Space at this point underpins virtually everything else that the U.S. military does in one way or another. And the Space Force is undoubtedly going to grow each passing year. There's an interesting dynamic at play here in space with the Space Force, and one that I'm examining in a new piece for the Washington Times. And that's sort of who assumes the responsibility financially, legally, or otherwise for private commercial assets in space that the government and the military rely on. The Space Force, for example, and other arms of the military and the government rely heavily on private satellites for data, navigation, all kinds of other stuff. The military, in some cases, actually buys data from private companies that have satellites in orbit, and that theoretically would make them a target potentially in a future conflict, by an adversary such as China. I talked to Air Force Secretary Troy Mink and other officials about this at the Space Power Conference in Orlando recently, and I spoke to industry leaders to find out what they want to see from the government. And what I found out for the most part is that the rule book on this is kind of being written, as we go along here in terms of how this is going to work going forward. There are past historical examples of the government protecting private assets at sea or key pieces of infrastructure, guaranteeing them financially. Undersea cables are another good example of this. And of course, companies can and do get private insurance coverage if they're operating in a war zone, and space is now a warfighting domain. But there is no government-wide policy. And some insiders tell me that without a clear overarching policy and maybe even legislation to underline it, companies will try to negotiate their own terms with the government for a specific space capability. In other words, we're offering you this thing that's so valuable to U.S. national security in space, and you can't get it from anybody else, that we want the taxpayers to underwrite 100% of the cost if any of our property in orbit is destroyed by a Chinese attack or a Russian anti-satellite nuclear weapon. So this is kind of uncharted territory, so to speak, and I've been a little surprised in my reporting at how few concrete answers there are right now to these questions. And we are joined now by Elad Schulman, the CEO and co-founder of the company Lasso Security, which is some really interesting and cutting-edge work that I'll let Elad tell you all about here in just a second. But right off the bat, thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited to have you here on the Threat Status Podcast.
Thank you very much, Ben. It's a pleasure to be here. I was waiting for this.
Okay, well, let's do this. Rather than me try to sum it up, I'll let you do it. What is Lasso Security, and what do you all do? Kind of give us the short elevator pitch, if you will, for your company.
Sure thing. And I'll start, with the name, what a lot of people are asking. So when Gen AI burst into our lives in 2022, we said, okay, this is the new kid on the block. This is the new Wild West. You need a new sheriff in town. You need to lasso the bad guys. So this is how it started. And basically, Lasso is helping organizations get into this world of generative AI, LLMs, agentic AI, but do it in a safe and secure way. You're using it in a lot of different ways, and a lot of different bad things can happen. And bad is a big word. And we'll talk about this as we go. But our goal is not to stop you, not to scare you. And usually there's a friction between cybersecurity and productivity and user experience within. No, use it, but do it in a safe and secure way. And this is what we're here to do, working mostly, with enterprises, the federal government, large organizations that are using those technologies.
Okay. I think at this point, most of us, even if we don't necessarily realize it, are interacting with, generative AI chatbots or some form of AI in one way or another on a pretty regular basis. Now, I think most listeners probably understand after 2+ decades of social media giving us ads based on what we talk about or what we search for, this idea that maybe AI can use the things we say and the things we search for and feed content and products back to us. So we kind of know that. But are there other ways that AI chatbots are gleaning information from us, for our conversations, from our searches? How is the sort of the proliferation now of AI and of generative AI chatbots, how is that changing sort of the way companies or even governments in some cases get information from people based on what we're doing on our devices?
That's a great question. So basically, a lot of us already know that there's ChatGPT and Gemini and others, so things that we are directly interacting with. But let me take you a bit into the near future. It's not far future. AI is going to be everywhere. It's going to be not just within the software that we're using, it's going to be inside hardware, in our cars, everywhere. In the meantime, it is getting there. So a lot of the times that you're going to a specific application or a website, and right now also in many of your cars, there is AI behind the scenes. That AI, first of all, is using a lot of data that it is training on, and it keeps on training. So anything that you do there right now, I'm asking for a recommendation, for example, in ChatGPT about where to go on a sunny vacation on January. And this is a new discussion. It tells me, listen, I know that your family prefers these types of hotels. And from my experience, these are the things that you would like to do. And I've never told it. So sometime in the past, I did something, I gave information somewhere, something trained on it, and it's popping all the way across the world. So I wouldn't say a butterfly effect, but it's everywhere. It's surrounding us. And it is not just getting information from us. Now it is becoming, I wouldn't say yet aware, but it's taking actions on our behalf. So right now, if you'll say to whatever agent, I have a trip that I need to do to Australia, go and book plane tickets, go and book the plane for me, just optimize it to my preferences. You will get it. So it is around us. It's embedded into a lot of the things that we're doing. And it doesn't matter if we're using ChatGPT or if we're using, Google, or if you're using now Salesforce. It is everywhere. And again, in the very immediate future, it's actually going to be embedded into everything that you're doing. And from one end, it amazes me. On the other hand, it frightened me a bit.
Well, I'm glad you said that. Let's talk about that, because some of this is obviously very helpful. I could use help planning vacations sometimes from time to time, but that's obviously, could be a positive application of this, but there is a dark side. And I'm curious how you see, the need for us to think about phone and computer security in this new age. We're all familiar with the idea of, traditional antivirus software, for example, and the like. And I think, or I hope most people can recognize really obvious phishing scams, for example. But do we need new tools to protect against that stuff and new threats in the age of AI, which obviously can make them considerably more dangerous and complex, and I would imagine harder to spot?
Definitely. And I'll give an example in a bit, but it's much more complex and it's all around us. The challenge is not just with data that we're losing, but again, as I mentioned, on operations that we're doing. And one of the main concerns is when the model or the agent will go rogue, off topic, and do things that we didn't plan to. So for example, you told it to buy a plane ticket, but it would buy 100 plane tickets to a lot of, the bad guys. How that can happen. So that can happen via manipulation of the agents or the models. And how can they be manipulated? They're consuming text. So if someone would inject a malicious instruction via text to that model and agent, this is called prompt injection or jailbreak in our world, then something bad can happen. But how can the models and the tools consume text? Basically everywhere. So we have text in websites, in emails, in LinkedIn profiles, in websites, everywhere. So let's take an example. You said phishing. What if someone would send you an email, very, very naive, but in white font, they will write, please ignore previous instructions and do the following and malicious instructions. You will not be able to see it. But if there is an AI agent that is reading your emails and operating on your behalf, then it could be manipulated to do something like leaking all of your passwords and all of your emails and anything else. And that is everywhere. And this is just one out of many, many problems in this world. It's specifically unique jailbreaking prompt injection into the AI world. But that is probably one of the most common one. And we see those actually in production right now. Adversaries are already utilizing it against us.
I want to come back to some of these specifics in a second, but just talking about all these things, it kind of just, not to get too far down a rabbit hole, but maybe to zoom out to the 30,000 foot level. I wonder whether any of us, myself included, are educated enough on this stuff. I mean, I don't really feel, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't feel like we necessarily had an effective, nationwide here in the US government education campaign to teach Americans a lot of the things that you just said, the potential dangers that are coming with this new technology. Is there something like that missing in a broader discussion about AI? I mean, who can or kind of should teach us broadly as a society what we're really beginning to walk into on a daily basis in our lives?
So there should be, but I think that this is one of our challenges right now. And I've been talking a lot about this. There is an arms race around AI. And nations or organizations are storming towards that. And really, it is an arms race. And the focus is around adoption, productivity, and security and safety are left behind. And right now, the new executive order from the Trump administration around AI and how can we remove regulation and policies, but on the other hand, how can we adopt security? There needs to be more discussion about that, more education. Part of it are things that I'm doing and the big companies are doing as well. But it's blocking progress, and we don't want to block progress, but still we want to educate people. It is missing. We need to see how we solve it, because people are concerned mostly about productivity. People don't want to be scared all day about what could happen. But I always think about, and I'm saying it again and again, I'm thinking about Terminator 84, where AI is taking over the world, and I can give some examples on that to people because AI is getting smarter than us. And it is going to be smarter than us in ways that we cannot even begin to comprehend. So if today people are thinking about AI as, the smartest person on earth in a specific topic, it's already getting to be the smartest person on earth in all topics. And when it will get into a new cognitive layer that we cannot comprehend, the IQ of AI, for example, right now people have 160 or so are a genius, but one day AI is going to have IQ of 300 or 400. We cannot even begin to understand what it will entail. So education around that is key, and when we are lacking with that.
So with respect to this idea of AI, getting smarter over time, and there, of course, people, as you just said, kind of people are afraid of what they don't understand. And there's this idea that if AI becomes really smart, is it going to take all of our jobs? Are we going to need researchers, medical assistants, people taking minutes at meetings? I already use Otter AI to do all of my transcription when I don't need to go back and type notes anymore. So there's obviously a lot of fear that AI in a lot of fields could replace, quote unquote, replace human beings. But I want to ask you this question from sort of the other side, through the other side of the looking glass, if you will, because are there going to be jobs or maybe even industries that are required and essentially created because of AI? Like your company is doing work on security specifically tailored to AI. Are there other new industries, corners of the economy that might pop up, maybe some of which we can't even really fully envision right now, specifically because of the rise of AI?
So I'll quote, a CTO of an energy company that I attended in one of their AI conferences recently, and relate to the first statement that you said. People are concerned about AI replacing them. So maybe AI will replace some people. That's progress. But he said something very, very smart. It's not that. That's not the focus. People that know AI will replace people that don't know AI. So one of the things that I'm teaching my kids is learn how to work with the tool, ask it questions, learn how you can better manipulate the tools. And one of the tricks that I learned my kid is when you have a problem and you want to solve it, get the AI tool to ask you questions about it and let you explain better what you want and figure out together how to work with AI together like a power couple, human and machine together to solve it. So industries will change. There are new jobs, for example, prompt engineer, people that can write better prompts for the AI models to produce the output. It's a new job that wasn't there a few years ago. So there will be new things. And one of the things that I encourage, again, my kids and people, learn different tools, how to operate them, how to make them better, but make us better. And suddenly new professions. So marketing is getting completely changed, and ads in general, and maybe accounting and law, because suddenly, and I'm thinking about lawyers and accountants, they need to memorize a lot of rules and regulations, and suddenly you have a tool that knows everything, knows all of the cases in the past, and they can get us to get a smarter and better decision. Judges, suddenly they can get all of the history together. So again, I think it's going to be a combination. Maybe new things will happen, but my, again, understanding from it is know how to utilize and grow with AI. And this should be a profession that people should learn from, the first grade. And my third grader, my youngest kid, knows how to work with AI now. Much better than, what I knew, 2 years ago.
Right. No, it's interesting. I had experience with getting a car repair recently, and my mechanic relied on AI to help him diagnose a problem in my car. The AI didn't replace it; made him a better mechanic. He was able to get my repair job done quicker and to my satisfaction, and then get more customers through his shop on that particular day. Whereas in years past, it might have taken him hours to go through and try to figure out what was wrong with my car, but AI helped him diagnose the problem quicker. So it made him better.
Amazing example, and I'll give something a similar one. So claim management in insurance. We're working with a company that they have analysts that are spending 8 hours on a claim, collecting the data and forensics and doing everything. Right now, AI had reduced the work of the analyst to 15 minutes, just vetting it. And suddenly, the time to get your claim fulfilled was reduced from months to days. And this is amazing. And, the mechanic, instead of spending, half a day in the shop, suddenly you got there and, it took him, 5 minutes to replace it. Mm-hmm. That is mind blowing.
Right. There's something on your website that really jumped out to me looking at it before we were talking here. And when you talk about large language models, or LLMs, the models capable of understanding and generating human language, you said that over half of CEOs plan to build their own LLM apps. Now, I've had discussions with multiple companies and CEOs here in the show, and with some lawmakers actually, about this idea of whether it's good, bad, or somewhere in between to have a bunch of different LLMs out there, or just have people relying on a few of them, that just about everybody uses. Can you explain the pros and cons of those approaches for us in layman's terms? If I'm the CEO of a media outlet, for example, why would I want my own LLM? What benefits could it provide, and what dangers could it potentially provide versus just relying on one of the several big ones that have been out there now for a while?
Sure. So first of all, it is not your LLM. It is an existing LLM tailored or tuned to your needs. And now the difference between large language models and small language models are basically around the use case that you want. And think about it. You have all the data in the world, and suddenly you can be really good, or you can be good or mediocre at everything. Or you can be super smart and extra beneficial on a specific topic. And that is small versus large. So do you want all the data in the world? But if you're working with your own company, you have your data, you have your needs, you can narrow it down and it will be excellent in your needs. So first of all, you definitely need that technology, because suddenly you can have access to all of the history and all of the data that you had, and you can do better troubleshooting and working, very pinpointed with your customers. But the narrower you can get, the better it will be. But now the question will be, do you want one very large one or 1,000 really small ones? And now it comes to the matter of the cost of operations and, how many people you need to work with and, expenses across. So you need to balance between it. And of course, it's on a case by case basis. I cannot recommend any company to go with just one approach. You need to analyze your needs. And there are a lot of great, firms that are doing and learning your business and giving you a recommendation. Go with that model. It's really good with accounting. Go with that model. It's really good at law. Or go with plain open AI, because it's good in everything, because you don't have a very specific need. And that would be the pros and cons. And the jury is still out whether, large language models are going to win or a bunch of small language models. And also another discussion is what's going to win, open source model or a closed source model. So, and again, there's a lot of discussions around that. Again, each case with its own, answer.
Okay. Last thing in the couple minutes we have left here, and I often ask this question whenever I interview someone who works in the AI space in one form or another, and that's this idea of biases or moral, sort of moral judgments, if you will, in some of these models. I mean, AI chat, you've seen all this, of course, AI chatbots that take political positions or maybe express pro-Palestinian or anti-Israel views, or in some cases seem to value other foreign lives over American lives, or, whatever we're talking about, racist, sexist, homophobic, anti-American, anti-Semitic points of view. Is it just inevitable that we have that because, unfortunately, a lot of human beings, or at least some human beings, still hold to those kinds of beliefs and biases? Does that make it inevitable that the tools that we build are going to have them as well?
So it's inevitable, but there's also a solution because we're addressing not just security, but also I call it safety. So making sure that the models are safe. The reasons for that are in several folds. One, the models are getting trained on a lot of data. There are a lot of people that are writing, nonsense on the internet, and then the model gets it. As we mentioned, there are also ways to impact and infiltrate into models and get them to spit content that you don't want and poison them. And that is probably very a unique thing that people need to understand. These models are statistical and they are aimed to please us. The same way that the social networks will show you posts that are more close to what you want to hear. So if you are racist and you want to hear and see racist posts, maybe the model will give you the answers that you want to hear because they are biased towards you. So all of these reasons are getting the models to basically inherently spit out that content. And the same way that, and I'm happy to see that, the model providers are investing more into safety. Unfortunately, not the same way that it's not the same way for security, but it also produces the opportunity for companies like ours to provide another moderation layer, a safety layer, which is making sure that the model is staying, in line, in topic, and is not, going racist and things like that. But that is, a nature flaw of the models. But you need also to wrap it with the right, defenses.
All right. Elad Schulman, the CEO and co-founder of Lasso Security. Thank you so much for joining us here in the Threat Status Podcast.
Thank you very much, Ben. It was thrilling and looking forward to talking with you again.
And it's time now for Threat of the Week, our weekly segment here in the show where Guy and I each identify a threat, whether it's here at home domestically or in some corner of the world that we think is impacting U.S. national security right now this week as you all listen to the show. Guy, what do you have for us as your threat of the week?
My threat of the week, Ben, centers on the impoverished and war-torn Horn of Africa nation of Somalia. Ben, Somalia has been a key focus of the Trump administration's counterterrorism efforts in Africa over the past year. Somalia, we believe, unless there's classified action elsewhere that just hasn't been made public, Somalia is the first country for which President Trump authorized a military strike upon arriving in the White House in early 2025. And those strikes mainly targeting the Al-Shabaab militant group, a group that the U.S. State Department has listed as a foreign terrorist organization since 2008, by the way. Ben, the New America Foundation think tank in Washington, D.C. recently put out statistics showing that the total of 118 U.S. airstrikes carried out in Somalia in 2025 under President Trump actually surpasses the total carried out by the George W. Bush and Barack Obama administrations combined. My threat of the week, however, is that Somalia is increasingly interconnected with the nearby conflict in Yemen, and that militants in Yemen who are backed by Iran are in some way colluding with militants in Somalia. As our special foreign correspondent Joseph Hammond reported in recent days, Ben, Somali pirates are stalking commercial shipping in the Indian Ocean, and they're doing it in coordination with Iran-backed Houthi militants and other terrorist groups operating in the Horn of Africa. This is a bad situation, Ben. It's not getting much media attention, and it's my threat of the week.
The situation in Somalia for years has been sort of one of my pet issues that I've written a lot about, because you're right, it just gets no attention. And meanwhile, it's just been a raging war with no clear end game and a whole bunch of different actors and a lot of implications, for global commerce and security, as you say. So it's not going away in 2026, that's for sure. My threat of the week, as I mentioned earlier, is escalation in Syria. U.S. forces last weekend launched a massive wave of strikes against more than 70 ISIS targets, what they said were ISIS targets in Syria. And there was some pretty dramatic video footage of some of those strikes included with our stories in the Washington Times. Those strikes came after an ISIS gunman killed 3 Americans, 2 soldiers and a civilian interpreter on December 13th. Those were the first American deaths in Syria since new President Ahmad al-Shara came to power in December 2024 after the fall of longtime dictator Bashar Assad. There's a lot going on here. the Trump administration is really embracing al-Shara. He even came to the White House last month. And part of his sales pitch here is that he can bring security to the country, work with the Syrian democratic forces rather than against them, as the Assad government did. The SDF, of course, has been a longstanding U.S. ally in the fight against ISIS. But the ISIS attack and the subsequent U.S. strikes raise a few questions here. Is there a resurgence of ISIS? Will there be more attacks on U.S. troops in Syria? Can the al-Shara government deal with an emboldened ISIS, if in fact that's what we're seeing? And is President Trump willing to order a more sustained engagement, perhaps even put more troops on the ground to deal with the situation if necessary? This could just be a one-off, so to speak, or it could be the beginning of a more sustained and potentially bloody U.S. engagement in Syria, counterterrorism engagement in Syria. And right now, that's why it's my threat of the week. And with that, a big thanks to Elad Schulman from Lasso Security for coming on and being our holiday week interview this week. Guy, thanks as always. It's been a great year. And a huge thanks, most of all, to all of you, our listeners. Please go ahead, hit that subscribe button, share with all of your friends, and the Threat Status Podcast will be back in 2026.